at the moment. The Women's Utility Network have recently refreshed their website. If you haven't had a look at it, can I suggest you go and have a look? It's really easy to use. There's some new functionality. All of our future events are published and available on the website. You'll also be able to go back and look at some of the past events. So if you've missed something you were really interested in, you can go back and look at it and get a link to the YouTube recording of the event as well, making sure you don't miss out on anything. You'll find all of our blogs and podcast links are available there as well. And anything that we're doing and updating, you'll find for our website. We really want to encourage you to join our network via the website. So if you go to the website, in the top right-hand corner, there is a Join Our Network button. It's literally just a case of you putting your name, your email address, and your employer details in there so that we can keep you updated on all the things that are happening. So we will be notifying you of event booking opportunities, as well as sending you a copy of the Women's Utility Network newsletter, keeping you updated on everything that's happening and making sure that you're aware of all the events in case you don't spot them on social media. So please do go and join the network actually on the website as well. The other thing you may have already seen is that we have a survey out at the moment about the network. We've grown hugely in the last 3.5 years. We now have over 2,500 members following us on LinkedIn. And we really want to know what you think, what you want, what you're looking for, and what you would like to get out of membership. The survey is about 2 minutes. It's really quick to do. But obviously, the more people we get and the more feedback we get, the more we can do everything we can to meet the needs of our members. So again, go along to the website, find the survey, take the survey and let us know what your views are. That would be really helpful. And then on to today's agenda. So as I mentioned, I'm Hayley. So welcome to the WUN For ALL, and thank you for coming along on this hot sunny day. Personally, I'd like to be in the garden, but actually it is a bit cooler in here. So yeah, I suppose pros and cons. It's like you keep looking out the window and thinking I should be out there. We have two great speakers today, and our theme and what we're talking about is the future of work in utilities. So much has changed over the last 18 months, and how we approach work and what we're doing at work is really different. So I'm delighted to have both Geraldine Buckland and Angela Booth speaking today. Geraldine is Chief People Officer at Elexon, and Angela Booth, Complaints and Quality Transformation Manager from Thames Water. So I'm going to hand over to Geraldine in a moment. She's going to share some thoughts and some slides. And then after that, we're going to introduce Angela, who's going to do the same. And then we're going to open it up for an open discussion and a Q&A, where you'll have a chance to hear what the ladies have had to say, but also get involved in the discussion as well. So in terms of introducing Geraldine, as I said, she is the Chief People Officer at Elexon. Early career was spent in banking, and she moved into HR later. So used to working in regulated environments, loads of experience in regulated environments as well as water and energy. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Geraldine to take us through the thoughts from her and Elexon about the future of work.
Thank you, Hayley. Well, it's lovely to be here today, and thank you so much for giving up your time on such a lovely day. Great to see some of my Elexon colleagues here. I'm just going to share my screen. Bear with me for a second. So I'm hoping that's working. Are you seeing it okay?
Yep.
Yeah, is that working? Is that working okay? I'm not hearing anything from anyone.
Yeah, it's working fine. Yeah.
Fabulous. Excellent. Well, as Hayley said, I'm the Chief People Officer at Elexon. And for a little bit of context, I joined during lockdown. and I've never worked a single day in the office. So I'll say a little bit about that a bit later in the presentation. I always think it's kind of interesting to look at the journey. So where have we been in the last 18 months? And I think sometimes when you look at language, language often evolves when social and cultural change happens. So I just want to kind of, as a bit of an icebreaker, remind us of some of the new language that's been introduced to our vocabulary in the last 18 months. So starting with Blair's Day, that's kind of every day, isn't it? Coronication, we've had too many of those. A quarantini, well, every cloud. And remote working. The really interesting thing is how mainstream it's become. So whose boss used to believe that working at home was having a day off? Maybe one or two of us. And whose boss has completely changed and realized that it actually means working. So a complete sea change in terms of remote working. Unmute. I think just about all of us on the call today have already asked somebody to unmute. The virtual happy hour, again, part of the silver lining in the quarantinis. And the waist up fashion. I promise I won't ask anyone to stand up, only because if I do, it really won't be pretty. And here's my absolute favorite, the new normal. We're all talking about the new normal. And what is it? And we all have our own paradigms about what that is. Everything from it'll slip back to 5 days in the office to totally remote to lots of different options in between. Now, what's around the corner? Change never stops. Change speeds up. And if we look at the history of industrial revolutions, there is a lot of belief that we are either at the cusp of or in the middle of already the fifth industrial revolution. Now, I'm talking very broadly here, so I probably span a little bit more than 6 to 24 months, but bear with me because I know Angela is going to go a little bit more into the detail of that time period. So not wishing a history lesson on anyone, just to remind us what were the first 4 industrial revolutions and what is the 5th? And also linking that to timeframes. So if you take a look at the slide, what you'll see is the time between revolutions is speeding up. We all know and feel that change speeds up, and it does. And if you look at this 5th industrial revolution column, 2nd decade of the 21st century, and yet conventional belief and thought is that we're already into it. And why? Of course, the pandemic. It has pushed us and caused a revolution in our thinking that we couldn't have anticipated. So essentially, Deloitte and many others are stating that COVID has heralded the start or the push into the 5th industrial revolution. So we're here, it's there. Changes will be that the old way of branding and identifying with organizations with massive physical headquarters is likely to change, with online branding being much more important. And of course, it's no longer just the kind of interesting whizzy companies like Google who are embracing remote and flexible working. It's an awful lot of organizations, and certainly at Elexon, we're embracing it. I think it's important to realise, though, that there are still many more lessons to be learnt from COVID. In terms of any change, there are always 2nd, 3rd and 4th order changes to come. So this really is the start of something quite different, quite exciting and quite revolutionary. And I think it's well to recognise that it is an ever-changing world. In my view, and these are my views, we now think in terms of before COVID and we anticipate after COVID, anno remedio. Now that isn't simply the moment when COVID doesn't exist, it's also the journey between today and all of the stages in between when COVID is no longer a problem. I think it's recognised that full resolution will take some time, and it will encompass some key areas of thinking. So today I'm going to share with you 4 key changes that I believe will impact on how we need to work now and over the next 5 years, and probably beyond. Firstly, remotopia, that is my word, because for me, remote working is brilliant. I love it. Not everybody is the same, but essentially it's moved from the margins to the mainstream. Green collar roles. We know what the first 2 are. We've lived with them for many, many years, but green collar roles, that is coming as the whole climate net zero environmental agenda increases. The gig economy. I have a 20-year-old son, and from the minute he was born, he pressed a button and something happened. That was not so in my generation. Everything is changing, everything is speeding up, expectations are changing. And finally, AI. In my belief, AI is about working hand in glove with and augmenting workforces, not replacing, and I'll say a little bit more about that in a moment. So if you look at some of the statistics, look how many people are now working remotely. Of course, not every job lends itself to remote working, but in terms of knowledge workers, more than half now work remotely. That's a heck of a change from 5%. In terms of announcements from organisations, many companies have stated permanent remote or hybrid working practices. Elexon has chosen a hybrid model. So when I do acquaint myself with the office, it will be on the basis of working between the office and elsewhere, whether that's home, from my neighbour's kitchen table, from a cafe, it really doesn't matter. But what is important to remember is just because we're working remotely more and having meetings in this format, as we are today, soft skills are ever important. Communication, empathy, ability to relate, and flexibility. So those remain critical, and maybe arguably even more so. Net zero, climate change. Which company on the planet doesn't have some kind of objective around these areas at the moment? For me, when I found out that electric vehicles were expected to reach parity with combustion engine vehicles by 2024, I was really surprised. And if you look at research, that's the main reason people aren't buying them, it's cost. So if that's equalised, then wow, that's really interesting. And it creates the whole infrastructure around how we service those vehicles. So I think we've all probably heard about charging posts in every lamppost. Well, who creates that infrastructure? And this is where we find new green collar roles emerging, roles that are all about preparedness for the climate change net zero agenda. And the gig economy. It's changing everything. It's changing expectations. When Generation Z hits the workforce, they have a completely different view of what work is going to mean for them. Short-term assignments, freelancing, work-life balance, really critical, but mainly problem fix, problem fix. It's all very fast. It's on demand. It's short-term tasks. And you may or may not agree with my first statement about the COO, but I make the point that the world of work is changing in a way that we can barely anticipate today. And finally, AI. I think I had a real wake-up call in terms of the realities of what we can expect from AI when I worked at First Group, because we experimented with autonomous vehicles. It really didn't go as well as we anticipated it would, but what it was really useful for was you can teach an automatic vehicle, an automatic driving vehicle, to anticipate other driver behaviour, and that's incredibly helpful. So it's about supporting and augmenting as opposed to replacing, in my view. So I do have some more slides. The red slide is just a bit of a pause. My view is, I think similar scenarios to this will play out across the globe. And I believe that previously labour intensive and maybe more dangerous tasks can be offloaded to machines. And of course, in terms of AI, there's an awful lot of process robots that you can inbuild into your systems. I also believe that where human creativity and the efficiency of machines intersect, new roles will emerge. I think the COVID pandemic also it's an inflection point. I think it'll significantly reshape the world of work over the next 5 years, and probably longer term than that. And for me, I think our challenge is to understand the second, third, and even fourth order effects of the pandemic, because for me, that's mind-blowing. I believe that the real winners will be the organisations that can anticipate and shape their own future, rather than sit back and wait and see what happens and just manage whatever comes. So this is my prediction, and I probably say it from the perspective of working for a small organisation. Global working's really easy if you're a huge corporate machine that can afford to base your people in lots of different countries. Elexon would love to be able to offer our people the opportunity to work from anywhere in the world, as opposed to anywhere in the common travel zone. And the reason we can't is because of taxation legislation, because of employment law locally that our people would then fall under. And we don't have the infrastructure to have payrolls in multiple countries. But my belief is somebody somewhere will see that as an opportunity and create some kind of umbrella or ability for organisations that are small like us, who can buy into something that can enable people to work truly globally. And I think it's important because globalisation has been on the agenda for certainly at least the last 20 years. It's been growing exponentially. So I think we need to be considering being part of a more global infrastructure. And my final thought, as I've mentioned, and I know I've really rattled through the presentation, and that was in the interests of time, but new industrial revolutions and change is speeding up. Everything's happening quicker, and it's ever been so. My question really, and maybe Hayley, this is a topic for another time, but can people make changes at this speed? Are we physiologically ready to cope with change at this speed? And what strikes me is that during the pandemic, we're very conscious of the mental health cost that the pandemic has caused to those working remotely and maybe not seeing people for days, weeks on end. And the NHS are talking about the second pandemic, which is the mental health one. So I just leave that thought with you. And I'd like to thank you very much for listening. I'd be really happy to take questions a little later, but now I would like to hand over to Angela. Thank you.
Thanks, Geraldine. That was excellent. I'm just going to get Angela's slides ready, and I'll do an introduction to Angela too. Here we go. So our next speaker is Angela Booth, as I said, Complaints and Transformation Manager from Thames Water. Angela is also on the board of WATRS and is chair of Thames Water Women's Network as well. We have a common passion for Peloton as well. I'm with you on that one, Angela. Best way to spend a cool evening. So I'm going to hand over to you now to talk through your slides.
Thanks, Hayley. And actually, I was up, before 6 this morning on the Peloton because today is not the day to be on a bike. Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here, and thank you to all the Thames colleagues who struggled to get in and are now joining the meeting. So it's great to have you here for your support. And hopefully this is a topic that you're really interested in. So as Hayley said, I am Complaints Transformation Manager. I am on the board of Waters, but actually my biggest passion and the job that I enjoy the most is my role as chair of Women's Network at Thames Water. And I'm fortunate enough to lead a work stream of 37 people, 20 different programs of work to help us deliver a gender inclusive and diverse working environment, for our 7,000 or so employees. So really, really exciting stuff. And I wanted to talk to you today about the future of work and utilities, and why this is important to me with that hat on, because COVID has affected women disproportionately than men across the pandemic. We've seen an increase in domestic violence during the lockdowns, and we know that that's been really well documented. And in fact, some of our, if you go on to the next slide, Hayley, some agencies are reporting more than a 60% increase in people contacting for domestic help, domestic abuse support. There's a knock-on effect of that, which is that financial dependence often stops victims from leaving their abusers, and the pandemic exacerbated this with job losses and unemployment, and those, as we know, also disproportionately affected women and minorities above men. There's also a comment here around the different types of work that we do. So the European Parliament statistics show that 84% of women across Europe between the ages of 15 and 64 were employed in services that were facing job losses. I mean, that's huge. And then when we look close to home, and particularly for me, I live in Lewisham, so I'm in southeast London. In London, mothers were 47% more likely to lose their job or to have resigned from it throughout the pandemic versus men. Really, really significant stuff. We then need to consider the unpaid work, and I've got a great chart on the right-hand side, which I'll talk through because I know that some of you are listening in while traveling. But the pandemic's really accentuated the different already existing gender norms. So women have taken on more work, more of the unpaid work that we do at home, including childcare and domestic chores. And when you have a look on the right-hand side, actually, with dual career couples, so in heterosexual couples, dual career couples, mothers are twice as likely to spend 5 hours or more a day on chores, and that's in addition to the work that they're doing, in employment. So the unpaid work is a real issue, and we've known that that's an issue for a while. We've been working to address that, through various forums, including awareness, and having those conversations about an equal share of work and what that can do to support progression in our careers. But when I look, at senior leaders, and I think that this is something that Geraldine picked up on as well, there is a risk of burnout, particularly when you consider taking on all of this additional work. And some really interesting McKinsey research showed that women in senior positions are 1.5 times more likely to think about leaving work as a result of COVID-19 or in downgrading their role than men. And actually, senior women are experiencing more pressure and burnout, given that they're usually held to a higher performance standard. It's really, really shocking stuff. So, we were aware of this, and I know that many companies were, and we did quite a lot to try and safeguard our employees and make sure that we were supporting our customers as well, as we became aware of the impact of subsequent lockdowns on our customer base. So on the next slide, I've just done a quick summary. We're not here to promote Thames Water, but we've done some really great stuff to try and support people throughout the pandemic. Within the company, we've had enhanced dependence leave, where we didn't let anybody, we didn't force anybody to take unpaid time to look after childcare. In fact, we paid people throughout the pandemic, even when they had to take time off to look after their children. And there was no one furloughed across the whole company, which is something that I'm really proud of. We're also now moving towards a why not approach for flexible working, which I'll get onto in just a moment, but that's really saying, don't justify the reasons why you need to or why you deserve to work flexibly, but actually, why wouldn't I do that? What's stopping me? And of course, there are still roles, particularly in our business, where we do need people during certain hours, but the why not approach should really help us shift our workforce to be more inclusive of people who have different responsibilities outside of work. In supporting our customers, and particularly around the domestic violence piece, something that's really close to my heart. We worked in collaboration with Royal Mail and other partners to embed the Safe Spaces app. If you've not heard about this, I'd encourage you to go and do some wider reading on it, because it's really good. It's effectively a hidden location within our website and a number of different partner organizations' website, where victims of domestic violence are able to access support without it showing on their browser history. And through the work that we've done and using partner organizations as well, we're supporting more than 1,300 people a day to get access to the right services to help them manage and hopefully exit that situation. We've also, and you would have seen this, increased the financial support available to our customers because we know how much they're struggling. In terms of gender diversity, we had some really great publicity actually just before the pandemic, where we were working to gender decode our job adverts. That was a huge success, and I'm really pleased to say that we've rolled that out right across the company so that we're not using language that's making people, putting people off before they've even considered what the role actually entails, which we hope will lead us towards the 49% that we're kind of aiming for as a company of women across our business. And we've made several other commitments, including signing up to the 10,000 Black interns commitment. And we're employing 1,000 people this year. There's a lot going on in this space to support post-COVID recovery. I've written on there as well the ban the box, which some of you might be aware of. So taking out the, do you have a criminal record question from application forms, although that's really important to assess as we go through the interview process, we want to remove barriers for unconscious bias that are stopping people even getting an interview. So we've signed up and committed to that as well. And actually, when we're talking about the future world of work and what that looks like, our employee networks across the Equality, Diversity, Inclusion programme have been engaged throughout designing what the different personas might look like. And I'm going to go on to talk about that just now. So yes, we talked about, what will it look like in the future? Will everyone be remote? Will it be a hybrid working model? We still need people to go into customers' homes and support them, and people, out in the street digging holes, and making sure that our customers are receiving life's essential service. So on the next slide, actually, in the beginning, we came up with 4 different personas. We talked about our field colleagues. They're going to be out and about doing the job. They're going to have the right tools and tech to stay connected with everybody. And the person who's really out there visiting our customers, being face-to-face, which is going to be important for the foreseeable future, certainly. In fact, I can't imagine a world where technology catches up so much that we won't need to be out there face-to-face with our customers. We also have on-site colleagues, and that's going to be really important because, whether it's somebody in the labs or somebody in the control room, there are situations where we just need to be there working face-to-face to make sure that we're delivering for our customers. We talked about hybrid, and we'll go on to that a little bit more in a moment. But yes, as Geraldine said, the future of work, when we go in, we'll be in there with the people that we need to see face-to-face to get things done. But actually, we'll probably spend half or more of our time at home. And we'd also talked about, remote colleagues, people who never had to come into the office. And as we progress through the design of what our future of work will look like, actually, we recognize that we're not mature enough as a business yet to have colleagues working remotely full time. The more research that we've done, we recognize that the offering needs to be different. We need to train our managers to be able to have high performing remote teams. We need to have an onboarding process and an induction process that really works. And that's completely different to what we've got at the moment. So although it's available to us, we haven't been able to get to that point where we're able to offer that right now. And I think that is in the roadmap, but we're a few years away from it. So when we're talking about the different personas and what that means for us in the future, it's actually really exciting. It's quite liberating for me, being able to take a job that's based in Swindon to be working in South East London. However, there are risks associated with this. And I really wanted to call out the risks to women and to the progress that we've made in gender diversity over the last 50, 100 years, that some of that could be undermined by the changes that we're making at the moment. So hybrid working specifically is risky because we know that those corridor conversations, those water cooler conversations are often the bits that really make the difference. The bits that you raise your profile, you build your brand, you extend your network. And there's a risk here that if we're not in the office, we're just going to miss out on that opportunity. On the next slide, Hayley, actually, this could suppress women's professional development because unless men take a greater share of the household work and the childcare responsibilities, like specifically within heterosexual couples, if we're downsizing, if we're trying to cut back, then actually it's more likely to be the woman who does that because there is still a significant gender pay gap across the country, despite us making progress to close that. So if there is cutting back, that's just more likely to be the woman. There's also a risk of people who aren't in the office, in that environment, making the important decisions, because as I just said, it's before the 5 minutes before the meeting that you might set up, and pre-influence some of the conversations. So if everybody else is in the office and actually I've decided to stay at home because it's more convenient for me to go and pick up my daughter, at 3 o'clock, so I can work right up until 2:59, then that presents a challenge. And I might miss out. And actually, hybrid working is a bit more messy and it's a bit less clear cut than the all remote. So if everybody was remote, then we would all be facing those same challenges together. But if hybrid's on offer and actually women take that because it means that they can, maximize the benefit and the effort, minimize the effort that they're putting into traveling and be more present for the things that they've chosen to do in their life, then actually this is a significant risk and it's something that we need to be aware of. We've talked about, it reducing our opportunity for face-to-face networking. Networks are such an important part of career progression, as we all know. So that's a huge risk. And, remote working and hybrid working models are linked you can see that in this paper by Clyde & Co, with a greater risk of burnout and with mental health issues. And I thank Geraldine for referencing, the second pandemic, because mental health issues we've seen an increase in that. We've also seen an increase in awareness, but we haven't necessarily seen the increase in support that's available. And my concern is that just as the pandemic disproportionately affected women, that actually the results of the new way of working, the hybrid way of working, might also disproportionately affect women. So what does that mean for the future? I mean, I don't have the answer. What I'd love to do is click onto the next slide and say, so this is what we need to do about it, but it's not there, Hayley. So there's no point in moving forward. However, I really believe that if we continue to be aware of the risks that we're facing, and particularly the risks to gender diversity, then we can do something about it. Whether that be a commitment for whole teams to come in and then to work remotely on certain days, rather than having partial teams in full time and partial part of the team not in full time, that's something that we can do. There's still, a huge difference in unpaid work in the division of labour within the home, and having conversations about, how the work is split up and actually what you can do to support careers and level out the playing field is a really important conversation to have. And actually, it might be on my list as something to talk to Daniel about when he gets home. I can see that he's joined the call. We need to be really cognizant of our hiring practices in the future. If we are able to move to whole remote teams, we need to make sure that, not only are we then having access to the greatest diverse talent pool by region, that we're still looking for people who have different experiences, different characteristics, because we know that they will give us, they'll bring that into their thinking and will come up with the best solutions for our customers. And then finally, this environment of remote working doesn't work for everybody. There are still people, women and men, in fact, people of all genders who are suffering from domestic violence. And it's really, really important that we are aware of that we are supporting our colleagues who need to come into the office and not making it difficult because of our new way of working, the new normal, as Geraldine said. So lots to think about there, and I'm really keen to get into the conversation with everyone on it. Geraldine, did you have any comments on what I've shared?
Specifically on work share, Angela. I think hold and see what questions people ask, if that's all right. Does that work okay?
Sure.
So if anybody has any questions, please feel free to add it into the chat if you would like to, or if conversation's already going on, or if you've got something that springs to mind right now, please feel free to unmute and ask your question. Well, I have one whilst they're waiting, because I think reflecting on what both you've said, slightly different angles, and I'm wondering if it's to do with where you are in your careers. So do you think, Geraldine, that because you're very senior in your career, that actually that more comfortableness with home working versus Angela calling out maybe you don't get the opportunity to put yourself in front of people in the same way if you're working from home? And if that's not the case, how would you put yourself in front of somebody whilst working remotely?
Sure. I think there's also, like in many things, a real element of personal choice. And personally, I'm really comfortable with working from a home environment. And it's probably because for many years I worked for myself. And although I had multiple clients and did some interim roles, I was very used to working from home and it worked. And I believe that we feel and we have blinkers a little bit about remote environments in terms of influence, in terms of networking, etc. You just do it in a different way. And we talk about water cooler conversations. You know what? If you've got Teams, you can ring someone on Teams and have a 5-minute conversation. And, you know, I personally tend to have a list of people I've not spoken to for a while and think, I'm just going to find a reason to have a 5-minute conversation with that person. So I think I've just learned different ways to network. Maybe it's that, but I think personal preference comes into it a lot. Now, in the last year, Elexon has worked entirely remotely for 15 months. Everybody. It's worked incredibly well. Could we be a remote organisation forever? Yes, we could. We've chosen not to because some people don't want to. And we're keeping the London base because some individuals feel they want to be there, some 5 days a week, a handful, and some when they feel like it or when home is just somewhere they want to escape from. So essentially it was about those personal preferences and choices, also because it's a bit of a hub for industry in the city. Those people who don't have offices use Elexon offices to hot desk, so that was a factor. But I honestly believe you find different ways of networking and doing things in a remote environment.
Can I ask a question? And it's sort of along that same theme. And I suppose I'm somebody who likes people, and naturally when I'm on a Teams call or on a Zoom call, I want to talk over people because that's what I do naturally. And so actually this sort of slightly artificial environment of queuing up, putting your hand up, waiting for it feels quite controlled for me. So my challenge or question, I suppose, interested in your perspectives, is I absolutely buy that you can be productive from home, you can get the task done, you can achieve a lot at home. And I'm somebody who's actually worked flexibly for years, so it's not particularly new to me. But it's that human interaction and the ability to really engage on a sort of seeing different body movements and seeing eye contact and all those sort of things that I think we miss out on. I'm just interested in how does that fit into the grand scheme of things?
Do you want to go first, Angela, or shall I?
Yeah, no problem. Very polite, Geraldine. If we were in an office, we would have both spoken at the same time. Joe, I agree. I think actually one of my colleagues who is an introvert spoke about how great it was that she was able to always be heard because she would put her hand up and they would come to her in turn, you know, on Teams. So that was like, there are pluses and minuses to it, but I agree. You know, I'm a people person. I like seeing and being around people, and actually it's different. It's not the same, you know. And I think to the networking point that you were mentioning, Geraldine, our exec is changing quite a lot at the moment. You know, we've got lots of new people coming in, and sometimes it's difficult even to know who the right person is to reach out to in an organisation of, you know, of our size. And so I think, you know, when you're in the office environment or just in a face-to-face environment, you can meet people that you didn't know that you needed to know, you know, if you know what I mean. And I think that there is that risk. But Joe, back to your point, I don't see that as a blocker. It certainly is much more easy to get a whiteboard out and collaborate when we're in face-to-face. So I take your point, but I'm an extrovert, and my introverted friends would challenge me on that.
I would really echo what you've said, Angela, about talking to people who are more introverted. Yes, they find the remote environment great for putting your hand up. And, you know, I have to confess, getting my voice heard in a room's never been a problem for me, but I have coached a lot of people who find it really difficult. So I kind of get how that is for a lot of people. what I'm finding again is as groups get established, so if I think about our weekly exec team meetings or my team meetings, we don't use the hand up facility. It is a bit of a free for all. And I think pretty much every voice gets heard. Maybe that's because we're really comfortable with each other. We can read the facial expressions. Maybe we all have certain things that we unconsciously do when we're about to speak and everyone starts to learn what they are. But certainly in the more formal meetings, we do tend to use the hand up a bit, and sometimes a bit of a mix. So it's kind of like just a new way of doing things. And I think, like in all things, some people will love it, some people will hate it. I think we're stuck with it for the future. And one of the things I'm conscious of in looking at our management development training, I'm putting the context of hybrid working into everything. So having difficult conversations in a hybrid world, managing performance in a hybrid world. So I think it's just about anticipating and being ready for the future and just embracing all the different ways of working.
Thanks. We also have a question in the chat as well. Have either of you experienced a very successful networking type event in a virtual environment? And if you have, what made it work? What made it successful?
I have. I just don't want to jump in, Angela. So I think some of you will probably have heard of the Independ Forum. It started with a very heavy emphasis on water company membership, but it's branched out into broader utilities now. And the Independ Forum have been traditionally face-to-face. They've had to start and get with the new technology of remote networking this year. I think mixed success, but the last few meetings, they've used particular tech, and I don't know what it's called, but it's on my list. I need to find out. It's brilliant. It's where you can go in and you can go into different rooms and you can choose, you can see who's there. So you know the people that you know and don't know. And it's like sitting at a real table. And then you go into a small room with just that table and have a conversation. Then you can hop to another table. So it's as close to, I suppose, physical networking as you can possibly get. Then they do a presentation bit and Q&A, and I think that's been brilliant. That's the best one I've seen.
Yeah, I've been to the Independ event.
Of course, you were there.
Yeah, and they use a platform called Remo, but they've customized it. So if ever you go to a networking event and there's a platform called Remo there, businesses can sort of buy it, customize it, and use it as their own. But I think it is a lot more engaging. Definitely, yeah. What about you, Angela? Have you been to a successful networking event?
I'm not a big fan of networking events. I like events with a purpose and doing some networking on the side. But what I have found successful is, when I find somebody that I'm interested. For example, our new strategy and regulation director has just joined the company, and we were in a meeting last week, and I clocked who she was. We've had a kind of cross teams conversation. And just afterwards, I picked up the phone and gave her a quick call to continue that conversation because, it was an opportunity. We had a platform where we could continue the conversation. And so that's what I did. And that worked really well. And I think it's, there is something in this about just being brave and taking opportunities when they're presented. So that would be my advice on that.
Thank you. Has anybody else got any questions? I haven't seen anything else in the chat.
I've got another question if I'm allowed. See if anybody else has got one first.
Well, Alana did. Just unmute then. I just saw that flash. Do you want to go,
I was going to ask about onboarding new kind of employees. So I had a recent experience where I joined a new company and I sat around for 4 hours waiting for the delivery of my laptop. Which was a very strange first day. And then a manager forced me to make 30-minute one-on-one sessions with half the team. Half the people didn't want to talk to me. They're giving me availability 2 weeks later. How do you manage that? Because it's difficult and it gives strange impressions on both sides. When you walk into this meeting, you've got nothing to say to this person. You've never met them before. You don't know what they do. You've got nothing in common with them. And then you've got 30 minutes to kind of fill. I don't like it. I think it's really uncomfortable. I do think it's really forced, and I'd much rather chat to someone on the way to the office or comment on something in their life or their office, their car, or, you don't get any sort of impression. So what would you recommend there? Is there a better way of doing that?
I mean, my view, so this is one of the reasons why we've just not gone to remote yet. you know, it's a different type of contract, it's a different type of onboarding. We need to put a lot more effort into what that induction looks like, because you're right, you really need to, you need a map of who you need to talk to, and you need a handbook of what you need to learn. And when you're in the office, it's much easier just to go and sit and listen to people who are around you, even if it's not the right person, just to get the context of what's going on. But you know what, even on Teams, people are people, right? People still have cars, and they still have dogs, and they still have pets. And so, you know, once you've got a list of, you know, and I always ask for a recommendation as well of who do I need to talk to next. So I think, yes, it's a bit more of a forced environment, and there is no hiding when you're on a screen, but it's the same conversation, and the other person's probably feeling it too. That's Geraldine.
Well, I suppose I had a real advantage because I joined during lockdown and had my own new joiner experience, which was really good. My laptop arrived 2 weeks before lockdown started, because it might have been going to happen. And I talked to my boss about, let's be prepared. And I think Elexon is very prepared for things, so that probably helps. So everything was there. I was set up on day one. My first day was a board meeting, an advantage because I kind of met a lot of the key players on day one. So we've always had what we call a new starter passport, which is just a kind of a checklist of make sure people have these experiences over this period of time. So we've had to adapt it for the virtual world. And sorry to say, Alana, we have had the painful, in your experience, meet each member of the exec, but in groups. So every month, the new starters get together individually with each member of the exec. We talk a little bit about who we are, ask them to introduce themselves, and then they get to ask us anything they want. Now, I found those a bit slow to start, if I'm honest, but they get quite lively, because once people realise, oh, I can ask anything, and, you know, no one's going to, you know, be offended or upset. You can have quite a fun dialogue when you start to talk about, well, what's the best thing about joining? What's the worst thing? They have kind of warmed up. Would they be any better virtually? Probably not. You'd probably still have the slow start, but certainly we have had feedback that they've worked okay for the people joining, and the tech is usually good. Also, we have certain training that happens early on, so people have felt part of, you know, understanding, for example, what our diversity stance and all the things that are culturally important to us. They are exposed to that quite early on, but we also constantly take feedback. So recently, new entrants said that we haven't been strong enough in who we are, our values, the culture. So of course we'll adapt that because we've had that feedback. I think that's all you can do, is take feedback from people and adapt all things.
Brilliant, thank you.
Is that right?
Thanks very much. So Jo, do you want to ask your last question before we wrap up?
It's my question is actually an extension of Alana's, I think, and it's an area that concerns me, both for my own daughters, but also for sort of the wider community. And that's when you're brand new to work. So where you're sort of coming in from, you know, either school or university or wherever you might be coming in from, and actually learning how work works. And I'm very conscious that, you know, we all learn by watching people and learn how to do things and how not to do things. And if you're sat at your desk at home, it's very hard to get some of that osmosis learning. So I'm just interested, it's probably an extension of what you've just said, but if there's anything different you do for sort of new to work people.
I think, if I'm honest, that's next on my kind of difficult list, because we didn't do a graduate intake this year. We're looking to reinvigorate our graduate programme. And what struck me is, when you have an experienced hire, they've been in a work environment. When you've had somebody who's never been in a work environment, it's quite different. So I think there is going to have to be some kind of planned induction with some kind of physical first few weeks involving line managers, colleagues, etc. And in terms of the broader osmosis point, do you know, we've talked about that quite a lot in meetings about, oh, we're really missing something with this osmosis. And then I was talking with a group of people and said, what's the office like? Because bear in mind, I've never been there. Is it vibrant? Is it? And people said, it's really quiet. So I said, okay, well, how quiet? Well, you could literally walk across with one of those wheelie suitcases and hear the wheels squeak sometimes. So I thought, okay, well, if it's that quiet, how is all this osmosis happening if people aren't actually interacting and talking to each other? So I just think, personally, shoot me down in flames if you will, some of this might be a myth. Yes, of course, there is something in it and you do need physical interaction, but I just wonder if we, because we miss it, we maybe have some rose-tinted glasses about it as well, in that when we are able to have a hybrid environment, I think we'll be in a much better position to really evaluate what works and maybe what doesn't for real, as opposed to what we think worked and maybe didn't. Personal view.
Well, we have completely opposing views on that. You know, I believe in the learning through osmosis. I did a lot of that learning myself, and you know, we did have a graduate cohort last year, and I mentor some of those graduates, and they're struggling. You know, they don't. Our company does, you know, water, waste, has call centers. We bill. There's, you know, we've got developers, all sorts. We do so many different things. We've got so many diverse roles. And they can't see it, you know, and they don't know, they just don't know what they don't know. And it's really difficult. And we're talking about, you know, really bright people who've just exited university and who are really ready for the challenge. But because they're not in that environment, they're not seeing role models, having conversations, you know, across the other side of the floor, but with people, you know, about things that they've not even thought about before. So I think that this is going to be a real challenge for us, Joe, and I've heard from our people that it is already. I don't know how we're going to address it, to be honest with you. I think that if we can make hybrid work and we can have that engagement, you know, face to face, albeit less than what it used to be, I think that will help. But I can't see the way forward for remote working, onboarding people from university, welcome them into the world. I guess the flip side of that is, if the world changes permanently, then these people will be experts. So that's something to look forward to as well.
Thanks very much.
Can I just say, I think you're absolutely right, Angela, in terms of not all roles lend themselves to remote working. Of course, I mean, a water quality sampling scientist is not going to be able to learn that without somebody showing them and sitting with them and testing and so on. So absolutely, completely get that. I was being really selfish from the perspective of our organisation, which is really knowledge workers.
Thank you. Thanks, ladies. And I think Angela, I'm with you on the osmosis, having seen and worked with operational teams where people are listening to other people's phone calls and watching and observing how other people behave. That kind of helps frame how they work in a work environment if you're new to it. On the other hand, I mean, I run a really small business. There's only 8 of us, and we did take a graduate on last year. And we had a really in-depth induction. So a very detailed induction that was planned. And we set up all the meetings for them, and then some time literally where they were on screen working, but they were on different things, but they had somebody there for them to say, I'm doing this, or I got stuck, and they could literally, so we kind of tried to create almost like a virtual office environment. So they were budded up with somebody, and maybe that's something to think about, but it's definitely considerably more effort than it would be if they were coming into the workspace, definitely. So thank you so much, ladies, for your contribution today, your presentations. They're absolutely fantastic. It's been really great. There's been some really great questions as well. I would really just like to just highlight a few things before we end today's session, and that is about what's coming up next, so you can see what's coming up next. So our next One for All is on the 14th of July. So it's net zero, a perspective from the water industry. So we have David Riley, who's head of carbon neutrality and Anglian Water. We also have some new podcasts coming up as well. So you can go, as I said, you can go to the website and pick up the podcast. You can get it on Apple and Spotify as well. Just search One for All. June's podcast is with Anne Dowson. She's group head of energy at Tesco, and she's discussing overcoming the barriers for energy management. So as I close today's session, I'd also like to apologise to anybody who had some challenges getting in. We were expecting over 100 participants today, and a lot of people have challenges getting in. I have been informed that actually in the last 48 hours, Zoom has done an update to its system with regarding to recording meetings as well. So I don't know if you all heard when I switched recording on here, there was an announcement to say the meeting was being recorded, and that has updated all the registration links. And I believe that's potentially was our problem today. So apologies if you had challenges getting in. It isn't normally that difficult to attend a WUN event. The meeting has been recorded, and a copy of that will be available shortly, and you'll be able to access that from our website with all the slides and all the material as well. So once again, thank you very much to our speakers today, Geraldine Buckland and Angela Booth. And just thank you all for coming along, and see you next month.